I am excited to be on the call with a good friend and professional colleague of mine, Dr. Will Fowlds. We just figured we'd chat rhino conservation and kind of go over some of the current updates and what's really happening on the ground and what's changing and where we kind of need to focus over the next couple of years.
Great. Well, hi, Mike. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you guys, and good to link up and stay in contact, if nothing else, through these tricky times.
So, Will, if you could maybe give a brief intro of how you got started. I know a lot of people are aware, but there's some newer viewers and younger people to the scene of conservation, and I'm sure they'd appreciate your story.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. My journey with rhino specifically started probably 8 or 9 years back. I work as a wildlife vet, so I've had the privilege for the last 20 years of being involved not only with rhino, but with many other wildlife species. And my passion really lies in the diversity of animals that we have access to and that we look after here in Africa. And that's what I hope to get back to one day. But for the last 8 or 9 years, my professional life and to quite a large extent, my personal life has been overrun by this relationship with one species, mainly because South Africa is probably the most important country from a numbers point of view when it comes to rhino conservation. And we came under attack to the extent where over the last 10 years we have lost, I think it's close to 9,000 rhino through poaching. So when that tragedy came into my life, I felt that I couldn't just sit on the receiving end and do crime scenes and postmortems and, wait for the next dreaded call to come about an injured rhino or a dead rhino. I needed to embark on a personal journey to get to know where this thing comes from, how it all happens, who the people involved are, and to see if I could make any contribution further up the chain, and to try and influence people around the world who could make a real difference to the lives of these animals. So that's where it all began.
It's very similar to me. Is there a specific catalyst in a specific moment that really launched it forward for you?
Yeah, I think there were two defining moments in my life. One was in 2011 when I came across my first poaching survivor, having seen dead rhinos that had been mutilated by poaching, and been horrified by that. I don't think anything can prepare you for the moment when you come across one that's still alive and hasn't died yet. And that first experience for me was 2011. That changed me forever. I'll never be the same person again. And then a year later, on the same reserve at Kariga, a reserve that GCF is very involved in as well, I came face to face with my second and third survivor on the same day, which was a harrowing experience. We had a year to prepare ourselves as best we could for that. But you think you're prepared, and then you realize that you still are not, both psychologically. And but at that stage, we were determined as vets to do better than we'd done the year before. And we made our first attempt to rescue one of these mutilated, well, in fact, it was 2 mutilated survivors on that day, on the 2nd of March, 2012. So that's where we really sort of dove into the deep end. We failed, unfortunately. One of those rhino, he died 24 days later, but the other one, Thandi, has become an icon, I think, for rhino conservation. She's gone on, as you know, Mike, to have 3 calves, and we are hoping and expecting for a 4th quite soon. Maybe that'll brighten up our 2020, because we need some good news. But yeah, the life and this journey that we've been on with that one rhino, with Thandi, has been a real catalyst for the inspiration that I needed in my life to really commit myself to the species and to making an impact making a real difference in their lives. And as I've educated myself about the illegal wildlife trade, I've realized that this is not a one-horse race. This is not a single species that is under threat. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of wildlife species around the world that are intimately connected to our environment. And when we save one, we help protect many others. When we lose one, I think it's a slippery slope for the rest of them. And we need to include ourselves in that extinction threat. I think we're certainly feeling the heat, literally, and we're also feeling the early warning signs of what happens when you start to damage the world around you. Mother Nature is built for survival, and she fights back. And I think we're starting to feel that now in very real ways as humans who have had a heavy footprint on this planet for far too long, and that's something that we need to change.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you were to boil it down to humans real quick, for example, if there are not iconic species like rhinos, the tourism dollars don't come into countries like South Africa because it's not as appealing. But then if you boil it down to the environmental side, keystone species and umbrella species, not only does the land change completely when you lose rhinos, and the fire dynamics and the parasite loads, everything starts changing, but you don't have that, again, conservation income that provides the umbrella protection for thousands of species. On the GCF side, we look at rhino habitat as a critical protection umbrella. And if you can train and equip the rangers and conservationists in that crisis zone up to the threat level of wildlife trade, trafficking, and poaching for rhinos, then everything from the top down starts to fix itself in the sense of, scale of rhino poaching to bushmeat poaching and, bird snaring and petty theft, corruption, all the things start to, you start to get a lock in on all of those. So yeah, rhinos are incredibly important species in the environmental setting and obviously for human survival in many aspects.
No, I 100% agree with you, Mark. It's very easy to get locked into a depressing story when you think about what's happening to this planet. One of the things I like to do is share my part of the world, because what we've managed to achieve here over the last 20 years is to go in the opposite direction to what most of the planet has been going for the last 50 years. So we have restored hundreds of thousands of hectares of wildlife habitat. We've brought back animals like rhino and elephants and lions to places where they'd been missing for 150 years. We haven't been able to do that alone. It's been with the help of our tourist guests that has happened. But I can assure you, in a time like this, in COVID, were it not for those iconic species like rhino, were it not for the protection efforts that you have helped us put into place here, specifically for rhino, given the amount of joblessness and now increasing petty theft and crime, I think the snaring and the sort of bushmeat poaching and those kind of things would have escalated to an uncontrollable degree had we not had that protection in place, which it was designed for rhino, but it's keeping those other animals safe too, in a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, that's a good point. COVID brought many challenges, from loss of funding, but then on your guys' side, same for us. I mean, closures everywhere, international travel restricted. All of a sudden, we went from everything's normal to we're all sitting in a form of quarantine or lockdown. And had those rhino efforts and investments not been there over the many years, especially like you guys, and reversing the landscape back to the wild, it could have been a very different story. I think, especially for like you and I, when we were chatting about rhino conservation, it is hard to stay positive on the subject because we feel very burdened by the topic. and all the layers, but there are a lot of positives. I mean, you've gone out to Vietnam yourself, and you've been a part of the wildlife education out there. And we have a demand reduction project as well in the heart of Hanoi, which is a key demand city for wildlife products like rhino horn. And to put a spectrum back in a time scale here, going back to 2013 when we were seeing this incredible spike in poaching in rhinos, everybody was caught off guard, and we were all scrambling in every direction to kind of put out the fires with a bucket that had a bunch of holes in it and almost no water. And now if we look back at like the last 6 years, between multiple organizations and conservation efforts, including your groups and ours, there are wildlife champions and guardians in multiple communities that weren't there before. Hanoi, Vietnam has like our Wild Hand team for the Wild Warriors Project. You know, they're reaching hundreds of students annually, and those students are becoming veterinarians and scientists and ambassadors for wildlife. And we didn't have that a decade ago. We didn't have that even 4 years ago so much. We had a couple key figures, but those efforts are growing, and that's, you know, that impacts every single species of rhino, and the global reach of everything, and how connected we are, which I think also people realized how connected we were immediately with the shutdown of flights, where, you know, we've seen a pro and a con. Wildlife trade and traffickers weren't able to move as flexible and fast as they used to because flights were down and they couldn't, you know, wedge things into flight cargo spaces and ship transports, but also, you know, the revenue loss and the global scale and the changing shifts of all that, you know, the dynamics are so connected. So big picture, it seems like more people are involved. It seems like more people are aware of what's going on. I remember 2011, 12, 13, 14, talking about rhino conservation, and the first response was ivory and elephants. And you're like, no, rhino horn. And now people tell us when they come up to our educational booths at events, and, oh, I heard about rhinos, and yeah, I've heard about this. And the questions have gotten a lot more specific instead of general by the public. I guess that would lead into another good conversation. You know, we, from the social media side and the awareness side, there's always all these floating concepts that the general public picks up, and they're outside of our professional working sphere, so they don't always understand the application of things like why is dehorning beneficial for crisis areas, and how does that help? Or how does community involvement really change the scale of poaching in the 20-year spectrum? And, you know, not everything is just anti-poaching and guns and bulletproof vests and night vision and that kind of thing, and how that multi-pronged approach, like you said, not a single horse race. You have to have a lot of avenues covered and really strong collaboration and teamwork to push forward. But you do see that when things are boiled down simply, the general public's like, oh, well, why don't we just, why don't we just put all the rhinos in one place and keep them safe there? Or, you know, there's those commentary items that you get that they're not comical, but, you know, you know where they're coming from. Which one do you think you see the most from the veterinary side? You have students traveling from all over the world to join your programs. What do you think is the first realization for those international candidates that not only is the scale of rhino poaching so big that you can't have one single solution and one silver bullet, but what do they walk away with wanting to do next?
Yeah, I think, you know, you talk about the sort of progression of awareness worldwide, not just my students, but the guests that we deal with. I think going back 6, 7, 8 years ago, the first response you had from anyone when you had a conversation about poaching was, we just need to shoot the poachers. We just need to kill the poachers, and the problem will go away. I think what we've all learned, a very hard lesson, is that you can shoot as many poachers as you like. The problem will not go away. This is a chain of criminals that are far stronger and better equipped than the relatively poor poachers on the ground. So our tactics have had to become much more diverse. Our approaches have had to become much more holistic. And people don't like to hear this at first, but you've actually got to do everything better. You can't just zone in on military tactics alone, as important as they are. What we've learned in Africa is 22, I think, maybe even 23 countries lost all their rhino by adopting a military-only approach. And at the end of the day, it's demand reduction in Southeast Asia. It's giving communities that live around these animals alternatives to poaching, probably the most important thing we can do. Both those 2 points are generational changes. So that's why the military protection is important, because it buys us time to put those other layers in place. It keeps enough animals alive, hopefully, so that in 20 years' time, there is still something for those communities to appreciate and benefit from. There is still something for the world to come and see and enjoy in Africa. So military short-term strategy, for sure, super important, but it cannot be done alone. Even the dehorning is what I would term a temporary solution to imminent threat for rhino. It doesn't solve poaching. It pushes them away to better targets for them, maybe rhino with more horn on or horns still intact. So yeah, military protection, vital as a sort of immediate step, but what we've started, fortunately, we're already 4 or 5 years down the path now, is work with our communities. That means education for age groups from 6, 7 years upwards, as well as those demand reduction campaigns in countries like Vietnam and China, and it can't stop there either. I think, what history will tell us is we went through a similar issue, maybe in terms of numbers, a greater crisis between the years of the 1970s and the early 1990s. Africa lost 95% of all our rhino over that period. And the global response then was to put pressure on governments. Taiwan was a big user of rhino horn, China, Hong Kong, they were probably the big three. And through a change in legislation and a change in political will in Southeast Asia, the poaching was almost stopped. I can remember the late 90s and the early 2000s having this perception that we'd won, we'd got on top of poaching in Africa, and those numbers right across the continent really slowed down. The mistake we made then was that we stopped with the political pressure. We didn't continue that campaign into the greater populations of those countries. Partly maybe because those countries were not as accessible as they are today. But what we have to learn this time around is we've got to educate the next generation in these countries like Vietnam and China. It must be something that they grew up with, knowing that it's not in their best interests to behave like this. It's not good for their reputation. It's not good for their economies. It's not good for their sense of pride and their cultures, because the world is becoming a very small place now. And, people are realizing that unless we all look at this planet differently and behave differently, you're not going to be seen in a positive light. And what we do on one side of the planet affects people on the other side of the planet. And that sense of responsibility now, I think, is pulling us in, and we're having to be far more accountable to each other. Even though we might be on the other side of the globe, we're having to be more accountable to each other for what we do to the space around us and the products we buy, which might impact might impact your life, the things that I do. So yeah, I think that's starting to sink in now, and definitely the conversation is maturing, and the kids and the passion that I'm seeing coming out of the younger generation, that gives me so much hope for the future. That really excites me.
I totally agree. We're running a Rhino Conservation Challenge right now with a social media star who's an animal ambassador named Coyote Peterson, and seeing the amount of kids come out of the woodwork who are just extremely passionate about wildlife conservation is really refreshing. Um, to to know that there are so many voices that we haven't heard, where again we kind of feel isolated in this situation where every day we're grinding on the next step, the next thing. How do we expand this? How do we do more of this? How do we call in more rhinos? How do we get more guests through a lodge? How do we put more rangers on the ground? All these things, but then we forget that the other side of that spectrum, the awareness side. You have kids doing bake sales, and they're doing their own education broadcast on their social media, and they're doing school projects, high school, college level, talking about rhino poaching, talking about conservation, talking about all the different layers of conservation application. It is nice to see that, and I think that's a huge swing in the right direction.
Yeah, look, my view is if a kid or a young teenager or anyone of that age is prepared to go out there and make biscuits, bake cakes, ask their extended family for a donation, if they're doing it at that age, that tells me you've got a lifetime of commitment to issues on this planet that are important. That's what excites me about seeing that stuff happen. The money that comes out of it is important, but I think the gravity of what's behind that money is what infuses us with the hope that we need to just keep going a little bit longer. As you can see, my voice is fading, so I'm on my way out. But if we can keep going for another 4 or 5 years, there's an army of young, energetic kids with voices that are better than mine, especially with social media, that are going to climb in here, and I'm very excited about the future. I know the challenges are enormous. I think our backs are against the wall. Science is telling us very clearly that we've got a decade to turn the ship around. It's going down unless we do that. But at the same time, I think we've got an army of youngsters that are in another league compared to where I was when I was a teenager. And that's where our hope lies. That's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. So for those young listeners, we have talked about demand reduction, which is like our 20-year investment plan, changing generations and inspiring other generations where they may not have access or reach to what you and I would have as kids and adults for wildlife education. The now is the anti-poaching and holding the shield, buying us time for the bigger change, preventing the loss of life, but also not geared at taking life, not focused on human life being taken. On that topic, we like to talk about how rangers became rangers to protect wildlife. They didn't become rangers to go after people. And those are two different lifelines, and they're two different strategies of the thought. And so if you're going into protect wildlife, your focus is conservation. And then we have the, rehab, rescue, rehabilitation, release, and then scientific monitoring, which is a large role that you're in, making sure that we can apply the proper latest GPS collars. So the ranger units and the researchers have the best data. So then that data can be used to, on a scientific scale, show the rest of the world what we need to know and make the proper changes and pressure the governments and pressure legislation. I think another thing that's really impressive and important is seeing changes in court cases in South Africa and seeing prosecutions happen. instead of watching poachers just walk every single time, uh, the Eastern Cape is really taken on the lead for prosecuting a lot of serious poachers, where the crimes may not have been understood in previous magistrates, where they didn't necessarily see rhino poaching as a serious type of crime, but then there are prosecutions that are coming through where they're understanding the connectivity of organized crime and syndicates globally and how that affects people on the ground on both sides of the world and how that fuels more violence, more corruption, the whole scale that comes into play. But there have been some major successes in the last couple of years in your guys' province that really showed to be, I guess, the true token of success and progress for landing real time, not just like a week or a bail or something where they were in over the weekend and they were out the next and they caught up again by another ranger unit. That's another scale. I think the public isn't really, they don't know that as much unless they're really involved. So that pressure had to have come from more education and awareness of all the topics and persistence from you guys, collaboration, so many different avenues coming to play in that again.
Yeah, look, I think certainly the last 5 years in this country, I think our anti-poaching efforts have been phenomenal, but our weakest link has been the judicial system. And as you said, now that we understand the organized crime, volume behind poaching, we know now that it's inevitable that if a poacher gets caught and they get let out on bail, they will have to poach again because they now owe someone the money that was used to bail them out. And the reason why they went into poaching in the first place is because they need money. Now they need even more money. And they belong to, people in the organized crime world that are ruthless. So if someone gets bail, the minute they walk out that door, that's at least another dead rhino that's coming. And if they don't get caught again, it'll be 2 or 3 or 4 or 20. So that part of the judicial system has been something that we've worked really hard at the last 5 years. It's a difficult one because it's not really something that you can put out on social media. But the way we've gone about it is, in the same way that we go overseas and we talk to people in California, or we talk to people in Vietnam or the UK, we've had to do that with our own judicial system. We've had to find lawyers and advocates inside the judiciary. We've had to get them passionate about it. And then we basically rely on them to spread that message inside their own profession. And then when it comes to court days, we get people in court because the magistrates need to see that this is something that is within the public interest, and people are very passionate about it. We help the investigators accumulate the evidence that they need, and it's not just the crime scene evidence. It's things like poring over, reams and reams of cell phone data that links a SIM card that was caught or that was found in the possession of a poacher that was arrested, links them to other crimes, and that's just mounds and mounds of data that someone's got to pour through to build a case. So all those little things are starting to pay off in our area. We've last year, in fact, halfway through last year, we had a 12-month period where we arrested 19 poachers, and only one of those guys got bail. And I think that's made a huge difference to the poaching statistics in the Eastern Cape, where we were losing between 15 and 20 rhino a year. Last year we went down to 2. This year so far, touch wood, we're on 0. So that collective effort, which is about protection on the ground, it's about the law enforcement and judicial systems, it's about educating and alternatives for communities. It's about demand reduction in Southeast Asia. And it's also about going out to places like California and harnessing the network and the support of organizations like GCF to come in and help us work at all those different nodes, at all those different critical elements of the strategy before you start seeing results. And at least now we can go back to you guys and say, we are seeing results. It took us 5, 6, 7 years to see that tide turn, but we are seeing results. The efforts that you are going to, are delivering on the ground, and that I think is inspiring us a lot now.
It is nice to see. Speaking of which, the recent story of where you were the instructor for our canine first aid course and made the kits. I mean, it's not as grand scale as seeing the arrests, but on the ground, all the time, all the effort that goes into training rangers, all the donor money that it goes into funding a canine. It takes years and it takes months of time to place and go through all that. And after the canine first aid course, your guys' canine Sammy, funded by Chip and Barra Rhino Foundation, was a benefactor of that training, which was an immediate save. But that's like an easy cause and effect. But then there were 2 others as well, not as severe, not life-threatening, but from the small scale successes to the grand long game, long line style successes. It's nice to have those at this point. Again, going back to the 2013 mark, we were all just like, everything's on fire. What do we do? Where do we go? How do we do this? What's going to work? What's not working? And the pressure is still there. The stress is still there. And the compassion fatigue definitely comes and goes with the amount of work and everything. But that, and then you guys being home to our mounted unit efforts and being able to expand that, and the team, now the ground team riding out with Alnick and the crew. And, those are all big successes as well. The amount of time and effort, and that all came because you and I were able to link up from a couple of mutual friends and chatted, and then you came out to California. We harnessed that networking power and we put some ideas on the board, and we ran with them. And I mean, the mounted unit there is 3 years old at this point. I think the crest mark was, right about now. I think it was beginning of September 2017. And it's cool to see all that come into play.
Yeah, look, a few things that come to mind there. One is when you touched on the word fatigue. It's probably our biggest enemy. We see fatigue at a donor level. We see fatigue at the anti-poaching level, because guys do, the strain of having to be out there day and night, always having to be ready for a life and death situation, and then hoping, as we do, to have enough in place to deter poachers, so that readiness never has to be applied. Our motto here is we want to save rhino without ever firing a shot. And for guys that are trained in paramilitary tactics, that might be quite a deflating existence, to be so equipped that the poachers don't want to come near the rhino, and so they never get that chance to exercise the training that they've put into practice. But that fatigue leads to loss of motivation, and these little things like building their skill sets, doing first aid courses, which not only interests them because they now feel more empowered, more equipped to get the most out of the tools that they work with. All these canine handlers have an incredible bond with their animals, and to know now what to do in a crisis situation, as we had with Sammy. I think it's very empowering for them. I know just that experience that our 2 dog handlers went through when, having received the training that was funded by GCF, probably less than 2 weeks before that, Sammy, I mean, she's 8 or 9 years old now, I think. So she's gone a whole life without this ever happening, and suddenly her stomach dilated and twisted on her. And that is a life and death situation, and those dogs die within hours. And had they not picked that up as early as they did, if it had been another 30 minutes later, we would have lost her. So blowing the whistle was really important, seeing those early signs, getting her straight to me. And then the three of us, we did some immediate emergency work on Sammy to get the air out of her stomach. So we shoved a pipe down her throat under a quick anesthetic. Then we had to move her to a hospital, which is 45 minutes away, and do emergency surgery on her. We untwisted her stomach. We took her spleen out because it was too badly damaged. We sewed her stomach to the lining of her abdomen so it wouldn't twist again. She lost an enormous amount of blood while that was all taking place. And yet, she had cage rest for a week, and now she's back in her rebuilding phase and back into training again. And that would never have happened had it not been for the skills and the knowledge that they had learned on that course. We would have lost a dog that not only have we invested enormous amounts of funding in, but there's 8 years of tracking and experiencing that dog, and that we would have lost if we hadn't have responded as quickly as we did. And I know that what it's done for those handlers now is it's really given them a sense of confidence and satisfaction that they are doing the best that they can possibly do for their animals. And and that is motivating. That's inspiring, and that's the kind of stuff that makes the fatigue go away. And that's what we need.
Yeah, it's really important to keep the morale up in the ground teams, and I can't even imagine what the loss would have been like for the team. I mean, like you said, every handler is so attached to their canine. I mean, all of us who not only love animals but have dogs, and it's irreplaceable. Even if in the team setting they're a team member, but they become part of the family, and they become part of your everyday life. And yeah, that was incredible to have a good turnout with that. Not a good thing that happened to Sammy, but we're really happy to, I guess, have the full story of the guys found it right away. They got to you. I mean, even here in the States, I mean, it's a common thing for, large broad-chested dogs. You can have that happen, and you may not realize what's happening. I mean, you just might think that, you're just looking at them, something's wrong. But I was extremely impressed with my background in wildlife care and being a previous vet tech. I mean, a handful of people that I remember when I was tech back at the hospitals, like they very few people actually realized what was happening and got them in time. And to think about that being isolated out in the field, and all the challenges of being so remote and being so distant, and just the chance that you were on the property at the same time. I mean, all the factors that came into play is incredible.
I believe even if I wasn't on the property, they still would have saved her, just because they would have used another method to decompress her stomach as we taught them. So I've got real confidence that course has given them the skills to do those basics, because you need someone that can stop the bleeding if it's a bad cut, bandage them up, buy you that first 1 or 2 hours of critical first aid response, and that gives them enough time to get them through to us at a hospital where we can do the rest. So yeah, it's a really important skill set for our dog handlers who are looking after one of our biggest assets. These canines, we know all around the country where you have a strong canine presence, the poaching statistics just drop away. And it's been a great story, this one. And that first aid course that you funded, I think we had almost 20 people on that course that day. So many dogs will benefit from that for many years to come.
Awesome. Well, Will, I know it's getting late your side, and I know you've got lots of work to do. In our industry, there's never a break. It's just on to the next task. So I will.
Ah,
I'll let you go here, and look forward to the next opportunity I can actually get back out there, since I came back stateside right as everything was closing. I got back in just in time, I guess, to be locked in to this side. But yeah, looking forward to coming back and seeing the team and saying hi to everybody, and jumping back in and get my own hands dirty with all the on the ground details. And until then, keep safe and keep well and keep up the good work.
no, thanks, Mark. Thanks to GCF. Thanks to all your supporters that side. I know you've got a very passionate support base. For us, it's incredibly motivating and meaningful to have people on the other side of the world that care so much about, our future planet and the heritage that is so important to all of us. We love sharing it with you guys in person. We look forward to the day when you can come across, not just you, but everyone else that's in your network, because it's really when you're on the ground face to face with these magnificent animals that you appreciate just how important they are. And that connectivity between humans and wildlife is something that we've largely lost, and that's what we need to get back, I think. If we can do that, we're going to have a planet that we can all enjoy and all be happy and share the space with some incredible creatures. So thanks for the role that you guys are playing in that.
It's our pleasure. I know I'm not the only one. I know the entire GCF instructors team is it's going crazy on all corners of the world. They're not used to sitting still, so they're all rocking in their chair waiting for the moment that they can move as well. And then I know, like, the instructors plus the education teams, everybody's excited, but I think we're getting close.